Okay, we'll go ahead and start recording. I'm kind of excited to do this one. I'm going to do it a little bit different in that I'm going to try and combine the various topics in here in one bigger example. A lot of times in these lectures I do smaller examples, and I'm going to try and build a larger example. It's not going to be huge by any means, but what we're doing in Chapter 7 is working with images. And so, really commonly used purpose of vanilla JavaScript is to do image sliders. And you guys have seen that in Bootstrap, and you've seen there are no shortage of image carousels out there that are built in JavaScript. And really, quite honestly, just kind of exploring what's out there as far as the different JavaScript carousels that can be implemented, by downloading a little bit of JavaScript, linking to that JavaScript, throwing some classes on your HTML, and here's a list of 37 of them. And so, this is one very common purpose of front-end JavaScript is to build image carousels, and they can be really flashy and impressive. So that's what I'm going to do in this lecture is kind of build a custom carousel. It's probably not going to be the fanciest one that's out there. In fact, there's one built into Bootstrap that is quite easy to work with. And a lot of these carousels, they just have you write just a little bit of JavaScript and a little bit of CSS, whatever, and it's not too hard to implement. The important thing with these carousels that are out there, and I would encourage anybody who's watching this video to kind of just do a little bit of research. When you come across a JavaScript carousel, it'll take 30 minutes or something of your time to just get familiar with the documentation. So find a carousel that you're impressed with, and then be thorough in reading the documentation and all the different things that you can do. As far as how do you set up the HTML, how do you, link to the HTML, link to the CSS, link to the JavaScript, kind of what JavaScript you need to write, etc., etc. Read the documentation is in short. So we are working with images. Along with that, we're working with timers. And so JavaScript is event driven, and a lot of times the events are based on user interaction. And so the user's hovering something, they're clicking something, they're typing something, they're tabbing off of something, they're focusing something. These are all events, and we can, the page loads, that's an event. The page unloads, that's an event. There's all these events in the page life cycle, and we kind of learned those different events earlier. Another event can be based on time, and so a second goes by, 5 seconds goes by, 10 seconds goes by. You can run JavaScript code based on a timer, or an interval, meaning every 5 seconds you can run this little bit of JavaScript code. Every 1 second you can run JavaScript code. And so really that's all this chapter is working with images and things like carousels and sliders, and then working with timers, which means you're running code based on some number of time that goes by once, or on an interval every 5 seconds, every 10 seconds. So let's kind of get into it. Again, I'm going to be doing a coding example of smaller, so I'll open up a little folder here and just kind of get this launched. And I got an index page here, and like I always do, I'll just start from scratch, bring in Bootstrap, and we go to the docs, bring in the one with this is just my... Okay, so we've got a hello world page here. Now, just some getting set up here. I'll make a folder for my images. I'll make a folder for my CSS. And I'll make a folder for my JavaScript. It's kind of a good practice to just keep your different there we go, get the icon, Visual Studio. And inside of my CSS, I'll just make a main.css. And inside of my JavaScript, I'll just make a main.javascript. And inside of here, I'll make a of course, we need to link to your CSS, which is in a CSS folder. And we need to have a script tag to the JavaScript main.javascript, and we'll throw in a defer. So get some boilerplate stuff kind of set up here. Now, in my body, I'll just start with the main tag, and what I'm going to ultimately do is have a container, so div with the class of container. So this is a bootstrap class. And then I'll have an h1, and I'll say image gallery demo. And inside of here, I'm going to have a top section, and that top section is going to have the big image that you're going to kind of see scrolling from one image to the next. And I'll have a bottom section. In that bottom section, maybe it would help to have a mock-up of this, but in the bottom section will be my thumbnails. And basically the big image is going to scroll through the thumbnails, and I'm going to be able to click on the thumbnail, and it'll swap out in the big image. So I'll go ahead and I'll do a div with a class of gallery. And inside of the gallery, this is ultimately going to be my top section. So a div with the class of gallery full image. Okay, so this in here, this is ultimately going to be my big image. Right, so this source, and I'm going to go ahead and download some images for use. Those images aren't really all that important. So underneath that, I'll have a caption, and so the image, the big image, will have basically an h1 underneath it, a caption. So a div with the class of gallery caption. And I'm also going to throw some bootstrap classes on this. We'll get the text centered, add some padding, and font size here. And this caption, you know, if we don't replace this caption with the JavaScript, it'll just say loading. And so let's just, in the vein of getting this set up, let's go to Pixels and find some images, some big images. We'll find 5 or 6 images of people programming. Now, the thing here is all these are different dimensions, so I'm probably gonna apply some sort of filter. And get images that are roughly the same dimensions here. So let's just go large, and we'll just get the same horizontal. Okay, so these are nice images, and we'll just click download, and let me put this in the right place. Documents, my repo, homework, chapter 7, images. Programmer 1. Programmer 2. That's the same as that one. Okay, I just wanted 5 or 6. Okay, so I got a bunch of JPEGs. So now let's get these thumbnails loaded up. Underneath, and with that we need a smaller version of the image. So we've got the large version of the image, so we're going to need the smaller version of the image. And so let me kind of pull this open here. Chapter 7, there we go, images, and I might be able to just edit the size down using Paint. Let's see, view, no, let's do this. Right click, open with. There we go. So if I go home, click resize, I'm going to click pixels. Obviously that's a huge image. So I'll just create a 100 by 66. And I'll click OK. Let's undo, resize, pixels, 300 by 200 roughly. Okay, that's probably a little bit better for a thumbnail. File, save as, and get this again in the right folder. So I'm going to save a thumbnail version of this image. JavaScript, chapter 7, images, programmer 1, thumb. So again, same process here. Open with Paint, Home, Resize, Pixels, 300 by 200 roughly, so that's good. File, Save As, Programmer 2 hyphen thumb. Close. Edit, home, resize, pixels, 300 by 200, okay. File, save as, programmer 3. Make sure not to just do file save and overwrite it. We need to replace. Edit, home. And finally, last but not least, edit. Okay, now let's get these thumbnails on our inner page to show up. And we're going to write a little bit of CSS to get them how we want them. So let's get here. Now we're still inside of the gallery, underneath the gallery caption. I'm going to go ahead and make a div with the class of gallery thumbnails. And we'll have an unordered list with 6 LIs. And if we remember the way these work, these thumbnails work from back in our HTML days, we create a link with an anchor tag with an image tag inside of it. The image links to the bigger image. So the href is images programmer 1. But so again, we're linking to the big image, but we visually see the small one, images / programmer 1 thumb. Alt is programmer 1. Okay, so this is kind of going back to our HTML days where we have an unordered list of thumbnails. We got to do that 6 times. An anchor tag with an image inside of it. Programmer 2. Hold down Alt. You can do a image tab on all of them. Might have botched programmer 4.
Well,
No?
you're writing that in the attribute.
Oh, good eye.
Sorry, that was the alt.
There's programmer 4. Okay, close the list. I'll make a little comment here. Whoop. I've got so many divs, it always helps me to kind of throw a little comment in there to know what's closing what, especially when they're kind of at the end of the page. So that's pretty much it for our HTML, and you can see we're going to need to add some styling to it. You know, obviously I don't have this large image displaying. This isn't loading anything yet. We got to get these bullets out of here. I want these thumbnails to go across the page, and I might even want to size them down a little bit. We'll see if they're... And you can kind of see the container, the Bootstrap container is kind of getting everything centered, at least what a container is going to do. So far so good. Close, 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 close. We'll come back to that. For the CSS, so the first thing I want to do is get my thumbnails to kind of go across the page, and so I'm going to make this unordered list a flex box. So I've got my gallery thumbnails UL, and I'm going to tell that to display flex, and I'm going to get rid of the bullets. So we've got the class of gallery hyphen thumbnails UL, display flex, list style gets rid of the bullets. Let's see, did I close it? I did close it, so let's open it. Try to keep it open so I don't... Okay, now they're a little bit long, so I might want to size these down a little bit. Let's do that with flex basis. So I'm going to say the LI is inside of the UL, so gallery thumbnails UL LI. Flex basis 200 pixels. Flex grow 1. Flex shrink of 1. Okay, so each LI, but I'm gonna get these images just manually resized down to 200 pixels. We're getting to the JavaScript part of the setup. Doesn't hurt to review some of this stuff anyways. Good repetition. Okay, that looks a lot more like what I wanted. Okay, and we can click them, and you can kind of see right now, this is what we did in the HTML days. Is we would click the thumbnail, and it would open up the large picture version of that image, and that's kind of where we left off in the HTML days. So for now, we'll hold off on the CSS, and get into actually a little bit of the JavaScript. So in the lecture, it's like, okay, some attributes of the HTML element. Look, we've covered these attributes: the source attribute, the alt attribute, the width, and the height. Source attribute is the location, the relative location of the image on your computer. The alt attribute is there for accessibility purposes. You're going to see today we also use the alt attribute in the JavaScript a little bit. And then the width and the height can kind of force a resize of the image. But as you can see, when you have an image, instead of forcing a resize with the height and the width, I actually went and made a second version of the image smaller instead of forcing a width height as a best practice. So as far as JavaScript is concerned, so when you're having interaction on a page, there's an image that isn't on display when the page loads. And so you're going to use JavaScript to put this image onto the page. And so what's considered best practice in JavaScript is to do what's known as preloading, image preloading. And basically what that means is you download the image as the page is initially loading. And so the benefit of that is that as the page is loading, you're going to download all the images that you might need for the JavaScript. Therefore, you're not waiting for the user to click or the user to hover to then download the image, because that would kind of be laggy, that would appear laggy. So the benefit of downloading the images when the page loads, or basically preloading an image, is you're downloading the images before the JavaScript needs them. You're not waiting for the JavaScript to need the images to then go to the web server. Your browser, would make a request to the web server, download the image at that time, and potentially, be a little bit more laggy. Instead, that kind of happens more in the background as the page is loading. And so it's considered best practice. Now, the code to do it really isn't super complex. We're going to go ahead and make a JavaScript variable here called image and assign it equal to an image object. So this is kind of the syntax for creating a new image. And then preloading is literally assigning the source attribute. Like, this is the one that will really, the two lines that will do preloading. Now I want you to think of this. If you've got 1,000 images, you can go into the JavaScript and create maybe an array of images and then assign each image source and manually type the image source, and that's fine. But if you kind of look what we did already in the HTML, we already know the image source. The image source, for the large image, the image source, we've already coded it here in the href attribute. And so what we're going to do, instead of if you had a lot of images, it doesn't make sense to necessarily code all of these image sources. Instead, we'll go ahead and notice here we're selecting all of our anchor tags. Well, what's our anchor tags? These are our anchor tags. Our anchor tags have our source attribute for the large images inside of the href attribute. So we're going to select all of our anchor tags and store it in an array called links. Remember, the JavaScript has a shorthand loop called the for of. And the for of loop is used for arrays. Okay, there's a for in, which is used for looping through objects, and there's a for of, which is used for looping through arrays. I went ahead and kind of can show you the for of that I'm going to use and that we talk about in this lecture. Here we have an array, and we loop through for each element of the array, log the element, and it would print out ABC. Right? So this is just a shorthand loop. It's called the for of loop that we can use in JavaScript, and that's what we use here. This is the for of loop. We're looping through an array. Keep in mind this is selecting all of the anchor tags. For each anchor tag, for each link inside of our links array, we create an image and then we preload that image. Right? And so what we're doing here with this code is the equivalent of this for all of our images. This is preloading all of our images using a little bit of, intelligent JavaScript. So instead of, manually typing it all out. So let's go ahead and apply that in our code demo. And so here's my JavaScript. And I'll go ahead and do exactly what the PowerPoint has. Query selector. All, right? Query selector all is going to return an array. And now we write a CSS selector, and I'm going to select all of the anchor tags. If I go back to my HTML, I'm going to select all of the anchor tags inside of my gallery thumbnails. So that's going to be the selector that I write. So the class of gallery thumbnails, A. Now I'll go ahead and write my for of loop, const, and I'll say, well, by the way, I'm going to name this links because it's an array, so it's multiple. Const link, and again, the for of versus the for in. The for of is used for arrays. The for in, you could see here we have a JavaScript object. For in is used for objects. Now, I really don't like this because this says for of object, and so this should be our links array. Okay, so I'll say const image equals new image. Image dot source equals link dot href. And again, this is reading the href attribute from the HTML and preloading all of our images. So this little bit of code right here should preload our images. There are probably what I'm going to do here is step through this and we'll watch this as this loads. So I'm going to open this with live server, and I'm going to go to my sources, and in my JavaScript, go ahead and put a breakpoint in here, and just make sure here's my links array. Here I've got 6 links, indexes 0 through 5, and so this link is now my first link that I'm looping through. I create an image object, and the link href you could see is programmer1.jpg, and obviously because of the name we know that's the big programmer. So that particular image's source is programmer1, and the preloading is done. Interesting that my breakpoint broke. I didn't mean to step out, so let's kind of step through. I would have expected that to loop over a few more times. That surprised me. Image.source. Let me go to console, make sure there's no errors. No errors. So that should have worked. So again, this is just a kind of a performance thing more than anything else. It's considered a good practice to get all of your images preloaded. We've now done that. moving a little bit deeper into the lecture, there's some book examples that I'm going to hop over because I'm doing my own example. On into the next section. So this is really kind of a short lecture that I'm making a lot longer with the demo. On into the timers. So there's really, I guess, 4 methods that we're going to learn about today. 2 of them are timeout methods. And a timeout method, set timeout and clear timeout, these 2 methods run JavaScript code or run a JavaScript function based on some number of seconds. And so the delay is measured in milliseconds. So 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second. So basically, you can call this this method called set timeout. Inside of set timeout, you say, well, I'm going to run this JavaScript function after 5 seconds. And so sometimes you're going to store that in a variable. Maybe I just as a demonstration, I'll say const timer equals set timeout. We can write an anonymous arrow function here, or we can call a function that's pre-built. So if I'm going to pre-build a function, I'll say function do something, and then you call do something right here, comma, after 3 seconds, and after 3 seconds, we're just going to do an alert. 3 seconds have passed. Okay, so now basically after the page loads, 3 seconds later, this do something should fire, and this is a simple example of a timeout, and always waiting 3 seconds. There you go, 3 seconds have passed. And so you'll notice, obviously it doesn't happen right away. 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 3 seconds have passed. Or alternatively, if this is a pre-existing function that exists, we could say something like and I gotta get my parentheses squared away here. Oh, I'm missing my curly. I always break this. Set timeout, parentheses, arrow, curly. There it goes. There it goes. 1, 2. Okay. So nothing new there. Now, I stored the result of the timeout function in a variable because there are conditions where you don't want the timer to continue. And so you might want to clear the timeout. Kind of go back to the PowerPoint. So I demonstrated how to do a timeout. There's also a clear timeout. It's like, hey, if you don't want to run that in the 3 seconds, for whatever the case, maybe the user clicks a button and you're like, oh, I don't want this JavaScript code to run anymore, you can then clear the timeout, passing it that variable. And so here, this is going to run after 3 seconds, unless we hit maybe I'll wire up a button. And just as a, 1, 2, 3, 3 seconds have passed. So for whatever reason, if we click the cancel button, on click, then we'll call clear timeout and pass it the variable called timer, because it is a global variable. It's not declared inside of a function. And so now, again, load the page, 1, 2, 3, just demonstrating the 3 seconds have passed. Now if I reload and I click cancel, you could see that alert, that timer's never firing. So that's the purpose of the clear timeout. So we will be using, now the only difference between a timeout and an interval, very simple. The set interval runs code every 3 seconds. So this is 3 more seconds have passed. And if I kind of load this, 3 more seconds have passed, 3 more seconds have passed, 3 more seconds have passed, cancel, and now my timer is gone, or my interval is gone at that point. Well, interesting that worked, because it should be clear interval is a method that you should use in association with set interval. So those are timeouts and intervals, and those are really handy. You're going to see them, kind of used in their use case, when appropriate. And so now to continue on with the original example, we can go ahead and get rid of the button, get rid of the stuff that just demonstrated that. Okay, our CSS, back to our JavaScript. All right. What I'm going to do next in my demo is write a function called show slide. And this is going to be an arrow function that takes one parameter for the link that we're going to display in the big image. And so keep in mind, this is the arrow function syntax. The way that this is actually is interesting. the way this is said to be, because it's an arrow functions are anonymous functions, or in other words, functions without names. And you store this arrow function in a variable. So what we have on the left here is a variable called showSlide, and we're storing a function inside of it. Again, I mentioned that during the function lecture. That was always kind of strange to me, but that's how it works. And the way you call this is just like a normal function call. You would call this as showSlide, but nevertheless, that's kind of the way to think about this here. So keep in mind what we're going to do when we call this function. We're going to pass in an anchor tag, and inside of that anchor tag is image, a large image, href attribute, and an image tag with a thumbnail. So the first thing I'll do is I'll create a JavaScript variable to store the big image. And I'll go ahead and select the now this is selecting the big image right here. So I could just put an ID on it, but keep in mind this is the image inside of the div with the class of gallery full image. Okay, so this is a way, without throwing an ID on that image tag, that we're going to select the image tag inside of the class, forgot my dot, of gallery full image. Then we're going to select the caption, constant caption, and I put a class of my caption of gallery caption. So that's this div right here. And what I'm going to do now that I've got my images preloaded, I've got the image, the big image selected. I'm going to go ahead and say full image dot source equals my active link dot href. Keep in mind the active link, this is our anchor tag, has an href value. So basically we're putting this href value, or whatever link that we pass in, into this image tag. That right now that image tag doesn't have anything in it. The next thing we'll do is we'll take the caption text content equals active link. Inside of the link, we're going to select the image tag and read the alt attribute out of the image tag into the caption. So, the text content active link dot query selector. So this is the image tag, the image tag inside of the link dot alt attribute. Okay, so we got a showSlide function. You pass in a link. We go ahead and select an image tag. We select a div. We change the source of the image, and we change the text content of the div.
Oh, your class name on the gallery caption is missing a dot.
Good eye. Thank you, sir. All right. A little bit more that I want to do here. But let's wrap in our timer now. So this function, we need to call this function at some point. And what I want to do is go ahead and make my timer. Gallery timer, gtimer. And outside of my function, so I can kind of put this here, I'll set my gallery timer equal to a set interval call. Let's see if I can get this right. And there's my anonymous function that I'm going to run every 3 seconds. And I'm going to make another variable to keep track of the current slide. So gallery current slide. And we'll start off the current slide at 0. And this will kind of help me just go from one slide to the next. Slide 0, slide 1, slide 2, slide 3, slide 4, slide 5, back to slide 0. We started at 0 because arrays count at 0, so that makes sense. So back in our timer, first thing I'll do is I'll increment g current slide, so it'll go up by 1. So we're starting at 0. This takes it up to 1. And obviously, we need a way to get it reset back to 0, right? So we need to go basically 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then back to 0. So I'll make a simple if statement here. If g current slide is greater than or equal to links dot length. Now keep in mind, links are the number of links that we have. The length is 6. There's 6 of them. So it's going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As soon as it's equal to 6, we need to reset it because there is no sub 6 in our array. So if links.length, we're going to reset g current slide equal to 0. So kind of a single if statement, and because it's just a simple if statement, you can write it all in one line. You don't need curlies. When you only have one statement inside of an if, you don't need the curlies. You could just write it in one line. This will get it to loop 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 every 3 seconds. That's a nice little trick there. Then what we'll do is we'll call our function. Here we're going to call our showSlide function. And what link do we pass it? We're going to pass it links, our links array, but we just need to pass one link out of our links array, sub current slide. So this will be start with sub 1, sub 2, sub 3, sub 4, sub 5, and let's see what I broke. Okay, well, you can see what I broke, but it's working. We now have an image swap going on of some huge image. So let's kind of get that scaled down. Obviously, we're going to get some clicking effect going on here. But we do have a image gallery demo on the way. What do I want to do to tame down that size? I can, again, let me think about. Okay, so the max width of 100% basically says to be 100% of the parent. And so that's a nice little trick. And, you know, I guess if I really want to scale the height down a little bit, let's do that. Let's just scale the height down just a little bit on each one of these. More manually. Home, resize, pixels, vertical, 3000. I don't think that's going to do the trick. Yeah, because it's, okay, I'm not going to battle that right now. You could scale these images, the original images down. Do one more thing here. Okay. Just did a little bit of a responsive, getting these images to be a little bit more responsive. Okay, you can also see, notice here, Programmer 1, you could see the caption working, right? So now that I got my image at a respectable size, we're cooking pretty well. All right, the next thing I want to do is wire up click events, because still my click events are taking me to another page, and that's not what I want. And so to do that, let's go back to the JavaScript. And this will be helpful for your hands-on test coming around the corner. How to wire up click events on a bunch of elements at once. And so for those of you who are paying attention to the lecture, you're going to be, if you pay attention now, it's going to help you this coming week. Okay, so keep in mind, this is as we're looping through our links. And what I'm going to do is select the image that's inside of the anchor tag. So document, link dot query selector, the image tag. Okay. So keep in mind, we have an array of links. We're looping through each link in our links array, and we're selecting. I'll just call this one IMG instead of image, because we can't have the conflicting variable names. We're selecting the particular image inside of that link, and we're going to wire up a click event. I'm going to do this different. Image, this one's going to be image. This one's image. Okay. Now I can say image wait a minute, I don't even need this. I don't think I ended up using this. Link dot add event listener. Click event. We're going to call another function called onClick thumbnail. So we haven't created this function yet, but basically we're looping through all of our links. On each link, we're creating a click event and calling this function onClick thumbnail. So here's our function show slide. Here's our timer. And what I need to do is create this onClick thumbnail function. So let's go down here underneath our slow shide const onClick thumbnail. In a prior lecture, we talked about an event object. As right now, you know, when you click the link, it navigates to that page. And we learned to cancel that default behavior inside of your arrow function, you pass an event object. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm going to cancel the default event, evt.prevent default. So this is something that we touched on briefly in a prior lecture. So now, okay, the page loads, we get our links array. On each link, we add a click event that says call this function. Right now that function is just preventing the default. So if this is working, at this point, all it should do is instead of displaying the image, I broke something. Console cannot access onClick thumbnail. So it doesn't, my function names are not wiring up. So what we have here is it's trying to call onClick thumbnail, but yet the function was created kind of lower. So let's raise this up in the scope so that it knows what that function is. So basically it was saying onClick thumbnail, it can't reach it. So in other words, we have to define it before we call it. So here we define it, now we call it. And now let's take a look. Okay, and now our slider's not broken anymore, that error has gone away. Okay, and so instead of now I can click these images and it's not doing anything, but it is doing something, it's preventing the default. Okay, I'm at a point where I'm going to give you guys a break, short 15 minutes, and we'll resume here briefly. We've got a little bit more to go, and we're almost done. Hopefully you're enjoying this different style a little bit.
Yeah, I think this is pretty
cool. Okay, on a brief break, I went ahead and just cleaned a couple of things up. I didn't like a couple of things. Number one, and we got more code to write. You know, I want to start with image 0, right? I want to start with this guy, and instead I was starting with the second image. And so all I did there to fix that was I moved this ++ current slide instead of the first statement. I moved it after the function call. And so gslide is going to start off at 0, and then it'll increment to 1. And then it should rotate through all of the images here. Let's make sure it gets to the last image. And then it should go back to the first. Okay, cool. We're back. All right, so I was talking about cleaning it up. We got our images scrolling just fine. The other thing I did was I just cleaned up the JavaScript and made my linter happy. I had to add a use strict at the top. It also wanted me to declare my function. So here's my two functions so far. I had to declare both of them before I called them. So notice here's my on thumbnail click. I did that before, but I moved show slide up because show slide is being called here inside of the set and interval. So I just moved that up. I think I was missing a semicolon in a spot or two. And all my yellow and red squigglies should be resolved now. The only thing I didn't fix is it does recommend me to use const for my timer, and my timer is clearly working, so I'm not going to battle that right now. Okay, so what's left, where we kind of left off, is that, well, you can click these thumbnails and it doesn't change the image. So now that we have the function that changes images, we just got to call that function from the click. We already have a click event, right? So we have a click event, which is here, and we have a function called show slide. So we just need to call this show slide from within our click event, and so that's pretty easy. We're going to call show slide. Now keep in mind, show slide needs to take a link. Well, it turns out that this event object is good for a little bit more than just preventing the default. It also can store the element that triggered the function call. In other words, you're clicking an anchor tag. That anchor tag is the link that we're interested in here. And so the way that you have access to that is through the event object .current target. And so now it's wanting me to move show slide up, no problem. So we'll go ahead and do that. There we go. So this is the trick. You know, the event object that's part of this on thumbnail click, well, again, on thumbnail click is coming from the link that you're clicking. You pass that link it comes into the event object, and then you pass it through the event object into the active link. And so if we refresh this, then you have to now, interesting behavior. It's kind of working on a lag. And you'll notice when I go to Programmer 4, that doesn't really affect the G timer. So working as we coded it, maybe not exactly what you might want to intend. And so one thing that I would do, and once we do this here, we could clear the timer, clear interval, the gallery timer. And so, you know, the way this particular one could work is we got the image slider going on. Once we click an image, we'll click this one, then your timer stops the rotation. You could do other things. You know, you could restart it over. You could start it back at 0 and start it back over. There's you know, instead of, you know, you could clear a timer and start up a new timer, start the current slide back to 0, and do a little bit more there. But this is getting the click event working on the thumbnail. For accessibility purposes, keep in mind that your keyboard being able to tab and use the keyboard in place of the mouse, we could wire up another event. So here, notice on each link we add a click event. We could also link.add event listener, add a focus event, which would call another on focus thumbnail. that's going to be very similar to our on-click thumbnail. And so this is just going to provide some accessibility to have the keyboard behavior match the behavior of the mouse. So you're going to notice I'm kind of tabbing on, and you can kind of see the tab with the outline of the box. So that gives you that little rotation effect with the keyboard. And then the last thing to add, this is not something we've done up until this point, but we're going to generate an event. Maybe we have done this once. We're going to generate an event click so that as the page loads, it kind of starts, because right now you see the loading. You see the loading kind of at the beginning, and then it starts. So I'm going to get that moving a little bit quicker by firing a click event from the JavaScript. And the way that we're going to do that is we have an array of links. So we'll say links sub-0 dispatch event. I think we've done this once. New event click. So this is how we're going to effectively start that a little bit faster. And so right when the page loads, you could see it basically clicks on that first link and continues rotating until we click, and then it stops the interval. Okay, this chapter, I don't feel like there's a ton of new information, but it is kind of a nice chapter to pull a lot of little things together. The main things in this chapter were how to preload images. We did that using this loop, this for of loop right here. We work with some intervals and some timers, and clearing those intervals and timers. And in reality, that was all that there was as far as new information in this chapter. All right, we'll go ahead and stop this lecture here.